Hello, all C3RF members across the nation. It's great to have you on board once again for another In Hot session. This session, we're going in hot on the subject of the Ontario provincial election, which is coming up on 2 June of this year, only a month or so away. It's coming on us pretty quick. And I thought what I do is I'm just looking at the lay of the land here when it comes to the this particular election. And after 2+ years of COVID, of being shut down, locked down, of losing our rights and freedoms, of being ordered to wear masks and get vaccinated. And it seems to me like our charter rights and freedoms have really been trashed over the last 2+ years. And it just surprises me like crazy that none of the legacy parties, none of the parties with actual members in the Queen's Park, the Ontario provincial legislation, are actually talking about this. Are we going to, if this thing happens all over again, are we going to do the same thing again? Are we going to lock down? Are we going to get forced vaccinations? Is this the way it's going to be in Ontario and Canada for the rest of our times? So what I thought I'd do was I'd bring in someone from a new party, in this case, the New Blue Party of Ontario. And I have with me a special guest, an able wingman, Marcin Lewandowski, who is the candidate, New Blue Party candidate for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston. And Marcin, welcome aboard. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. And I just want to kick this off by asking you, was being in politics part of your life plan? Is this what you always dreamed of doing, being a politician?
Well, firstly, Ross, thank you for the invite. And it's a pleasure and frankly an honor to be here. To answer your question, no, I quite the opposite, frankly. I did participate in a number of campaigns as a canvasser. I was helping out. I always thought that being involved in the political process as a citizen is important. But maybe because by participating in canvassing or in elections, I've seen politics from the inside, and I did help out, for example, on the previous elections. I helped out the Conservatives traditionally. So no, I've seen how politics works. I've known politicians personally, and it's a tough life. Firstly, secondly, it's a demanding life. But that's not the reason I guess wasn't interested in politics first. It's just it wasn't anything that would ever interested me from the professional perspective. I do my idea of life. I like to have privacy. That's very difficult these days when you're a politician. I don't use social media, for example, and I know it's difficult to be in politics and not have social media. And I very much enjoy family time and free time. So that's also very difficult to achieve when you have a political life, political career. Exactly. So no, so to answer your question, that wasn't the idea. That wasn't the plan at all.
Okay, I'm going to just share a screen here, Marcin. And this is what caught my attention and drew my attention to you in particular. It's an Inside Ottawa Valley article, and in it, it talks about Marcin Lewandowski. Son of Solidarity, Polish-born Marcin Lewandowski is New Blue Party's candidate for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston. And you go down here, and this caught my eye. His parents were journalists who published underground materials. That the kind of tradition I grew up with in the fight for freedom. And then you go on to say that this wasn't your plan, but the Freedom Convoy. It seems to me from this article that the Freedom Convoy inspired you to get involved. It gave you some sort of a fire in the belly to do the things that you don't really want to do. You don't want to give up your privacy. You don't want to have to jump on the social media. All these things you're going to have to do. And but you say it was a Freedom Convoy that got you going, and you make an analogy here saying that there were a lot of Polish flags of the Freedom Convoy, and the red and white was of the Polish flag was quite at home with the Canadian red and white against the maple leaf. So tell me about your earlier life and your parents. I'm very interested in about. I'll stop sharing here. I'm very interested to hear about your parents and their activities in Poland and the Solidarity movement.
Yes, of course. So I maybe let me start with just a bit of a background about my family and myself. I came to Canada when I was almost 17. At that time, I still have my treasured Polish accent, so and you can hear that. And so I spent the early part of my life in Poland. Both of my parents were activist journalists in underground Poland during the 80s. They, as students and right after they finished their studies, they published underground materials. At that time, they didn't have the internet, so the way the materials were published is by presses and by old typing machines. They didn't even have the computers. So so that was I do have a few interesting stories if you'd like to hear about them later, but that was also much riskier, well, riskier and less riskier, because riskier, you had to have a lot of equipment. So when the police came in and let's say they entered your apartment, which they did all the time, hunting down these activists in Poland, they could see the equipment, and that would be enough of an evidence. Now everybody has a computer, so really it's very difficult to find actually who's publishing and who's not. On the other hand, now everybody, the government has access to all of our data, all of the communications, and so on and so forth. So so from that perspective, it is whatever we do here, it by nature of it, it's public. It's hard to be underground when you're being active, trying to protest against the government, what I think is tyranny. But so those are, so both of my parents were involved in the Solidarity movement, and those were the stories and the traditions I grew up with. I've heard those stories, and they continued fighting throughout. They're still continuing fighting on different fronts in terms of different activities they're taking on. For example, frankly, the reason we eventually ended up in Canada, and my parents eventually got a divorce, but the reason we ended up in Canada with my mom is because she got fired from she was a journalist later at a Polish TV station, and she got fired. A left-leaning government took over power at one point, and she got fired. And then so we had all this time to actually come here visit, and she eventually fell in love here. And that's how we stay here. So that tradition and that fight for freedom was always dear to me, and continues to be. And I have to say, this is thanks to my mom, really, and to my dad too. But my mom instilled those values definitely in us. And look, she's at the forefront maybe, but she is also involved in the fight for freedom here in Canada now that we live here. So she's doing her own stuff on the side. So it's never and stop me, by the way, stop me when you have other questions.
Well,
but
I just want to you're hitting a chord here with me, and this is unbelievable. I'm going to share a screen again.
Yeah.
Because I thought I might want to put up this screen, and this is a column I wrote for C3RF. I try to do a weekly update, is what I call it. And here back in 11th February, I talk about the Canadian Zamasu. And Zamasu is exactly what your mom and dad were doing back in Poland. And I go on here to note that the term Zamasu is a Russian term, Sam for self, and Idevetsvesko for publishing, and it was a way of people working against the totalitarian state in the Soviet bloc, and they did it, as you say, through presses, photocopiers, and other such devices. So when I was looking at your background, and this sprung to my mind, was what we seem to be dealing with here in Canada right now is something very, very similar to what your parents dealt with in Poland. And it's a Zamasu, where people have to kind of go underground to publish. I mean, we certainly we see it in today's Canada, where where they're talking about having legislation where you have to be a qualified journalistic organization. I'm thinking about Bill C11, for example, uh, before you can be registered under the CRTC and be controlled by CRTC regulations. So a normal a guy just like me or you, or a guy like me, because if you're a politician, you're going to be special. But a guy like me, I'd have to. I'm looking at maybe having to register myself with the CRTC so they control what I say. This is um, this is shades, maybe not so much shades, but this is an echo coming to us from the Soviet bloc in the Zamostat days. Do you see that kind of a parallel going on here with?
Oh yeah, and analogies to communism, to the Soviet type of communism, are everywhere here, and they go, and they're even almost literal, starting with the. So let me maybe quickly remind you and the audience here what happened in Poland. Poland was the first one to abolish communism in the east of Europe. So what happened is the solidarity movements, the strikes and the protests really started with John Paul II, the Pope, coming to Poland in '79. What happened is the Polish people went to see the Pope, and all of a sudden everybody looked around, and there were millions and millions of people on the streets and in crowds gathering, and just to see and hear the Pope. And at that point, everybody looked around and everybody noticed that there's so many of us. Whatever we see on TV is not true. So many of us are thinking the same way, that we're thinking about freedom. So that was the spark. And that's an analogy to the convoy. When we had all these thousands of people lining up the highways to the point where the city of Toronto or whoever administers these highway cameras had to turn them off so nobody else sees the crowds that were gathering here. Same here. I live close to Ottawa, so so people were gathering on the bridges to welcome the truckers. So that was one analogy. Then in '81, as the protests started forming, the solidarity movement started organizing itself in '81. The communist government in Poland implemented the martial law, which is an analogy to the Emergency Management Act, or implemented earlier by Trudeau and at the provincial level by Doug Ford. So the analogies are there, but they're happening much faster here in Canada for some reason. And and another thing is that it took then 8 years for the solidarity to win and to kick out the communists. And during those 8 years, initially there were repressions, of course. A lot of people left Poland, so that's why if you have Polish friends here in Canada, they're likely they came in the '80s, because that was the time when the borders opened, simply because the government decided, okay, let's better remove these people from the country because they're causing trouble. And then, of course, nobody believed that things would change. I mean, it was the Soviet Union. You looked at the TV, you looked at, people were afraid to talk to each other, frankly. So the only information you could get really was in the church. And we can talk about that later, but the church somehow remains still the place of independent thought. And then so nobody believed that anything will change, but yet in '89, the whole system collapsed, the communists lost, and we had democratic elections. So so when people lose hope here in Canada, I always remind them, look, we have so many analogies here to what happened in the '80s. Nobody believes that, that it can happen here in Canada, but it has to, it will, because communism or tyranny in itself are, and in my opinion, what we see here in Canada is firstly, it's tyranny, but it's very similar to what communism was in the Soviet Union. It's simply unnatural. It has to fail eventually. It's against human nature. So it's a matter of sticking around and fighting for freedom.
No, I found it really, your analogies are just incredibly interesting. And I find that analogy with the Freedom Convoy 2022 to be bang on. And I remember you could feel the rumble down the road as the trucks were moving in from Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and they were coming through. And as you say, they wasn't really published all that much. And I recall the prime minister saying, talking about these people like they were racist, misogynist, and a fringe minority. And when you finally did see the results of the convoy finding its way to Ottawa, and you saw the size of it, it really made the point that our prime minister was lying to us. He was lying to us, and this gets into the other another analogy that you're bringing up is that uh, these things proceed, and tyranny is not self-sustaining. It's a system. It's a way of governance that requires coercion to make people do what you want them to do, because people are like cats. They just want to be happy. They just want to live their own lives and fulfill their own life plans, and that might mean that they'll go this direction instead of the direction the government wants them to go. So it's naturally unsustainable. You cannot have that kind of government, a tyrannical government, unless you're prepared to crack down and go coercive. And that's what we're seeing now. Is we're seeing, I think, another cycle where the more the government cracks down and they declare emergency acts and they freeze bank accounts and they do this, the more they come up against resistance, and the more resistance you see people, like-minded people, coming forward with, the more they have to crack down, and you end up with this cycle, unsustainable cycle that eventually leads to the tyranny losing, as it did in Poland over the period 1881 to 89. I also find it interesting that you're saying it's going a lot faster here than it's going there. That is very, very interesting and maybe social media has a lot to do with that, but more and more people are kind of catching on to the fact that, we're not hearing the whole story here. We're just not hearing the whole story. Now,
Yeah.
now the whole story, this is another interest. I just wanted to get your thoughts on this, because I know that in Smith Falls, I think it was yesterday or the day before, provincial authorities, provincial electioneers, they had a debate, and between the parties, I guess with active members in the House of Legislature. But your party, New Blue Ontario Party, was not invited to the debate. Can you speak to that? Why did that happen? What was the reason given for you not attending that particular debate?
There was no reason provided to me directly. So there were two parties that were invited. We have two parties formed very recently on the New Blue Party. So that's the party that I represent, and there's the Ontario Party, which is also a right-wing party. And both of these parties have a full slates of candidates. So we have a candidate in every single riding in the province. Our party, New Blue, was in fact the first one to have all 124 candidates represented and approved by Elections Ontario. So when you look at how the party is administered and organized, we are definitely a big party. We have candidates everywhere, and yet we weren't invited. I did reach out to the organizers, and just to be clear, it's not Elections Ontario who organizes these events. These are usually private organizations in cooperation with a local TV station, in this case owned by Cogeco.
Okay.
But I did reach out, and I was ignored personally. I eventually spoke with the Ontario Party campaign manager, and he informed me that they've managed to reach the organizers, and the reason provided was that they had this event planned already, and they couldn't accommodate us anymore. So that was the reason. So what we did is,
Wow.
Together with the Ontario Party, we've organized our own debate. So we set ourselves up on the lawn right in front of the TV studio, and our supporters came to cheer us on, and then we actually had microphones, we had stands, and
Oh.
we had the whole event recorded on video as well. And I debated the Ontario Party candidate, and so we had a concurrent event going on at the time of the real debate. And I'll be honest with you, and I know I'm biased on this front, but I looked at the debate they had there at the TV station, and it was just, there was no content in there. It was just party advertisements. There was no debating, no exchange of arguments. It wasn't a conversation. Not even there wasn't a point where the candidates would actually argue with, or perhaps debate, converse about, right? Though it was just uh, straightforward questions and answers based on whatever party has on their website. So I wish we were there, because we could have at least made the whole debate at least more interesting, even if the audience disagrees with what we have to say. But at least we would bring in a bit of a different perspective on the issues we're facing. And of course, nothing related to freedoms was discussed. Nothing related to the to the very issues that we're discussing here right now.
I know it seems like the legacy parties, it's all about we're going to give $1 billion here, we're going to give $1 billion there. It's all about money. It's all about this is what I can do for you. And it's like the last 2+ years of being shut down and losing all of our freedoms and liberties just never happened. It forget about that. There's nothing to see over there. Move along, move along. And meanwhile, I think this is of critical importance to the Canadian citizens, and I think that's why we're beginning to see the media is the mainstream media is trying to keep a lid on this, and you can see by the reportage that it's getting more and more difficult because someone pops up and says, "What about this?" And I'm thinking about the Conservative Party leadership debates, where all of a sudden people are all for Freedom Convoy 2022. All of a sudden, I gave a coffee to a Freedom Convoy protester, or I've been backing them up foursquare all the time. And I guess what they're doing is they're seeing that their internal polling is saying that there's a lot more interest out here in TV land about rights and freedoms than you've been letting on. And I think the real surprise, maybe this is at the federal level, but maybe just get your input on it, is Roman Baber. He's the one guy that actually suffered through holding principled views on lockdowns, vaccine mandates. He lost his seat in the Ontario legislature as a result, and he's kind of the dark horse there that's raising these points, and I think surprising a lot of people in the mainstream media and whatnot. What do you think about that, about just trying to keep the lid on, and it's getting tougher and tougher?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's, again, going back to the analogy of what happened in under communism in the 80s. At one point, the media has become so ridiculous in terms of the propaganda they were putting out that people just stopped believing it. Because what happened on TV, you go outside and it's a totally different world. And propaganda works only if it's done smartly. And it's been done that way up until maybe the convoy, actually, where you kind of trust it. You shouldn't be really trusting television, but maybe they do sound intelligent and maybe we should listen to them. Yeah. But when the convoy started and what the media did and how they reported or not reported on the events, anybody who had even a moment of a conversation with anybody who was there or who actually came out in Ottawa to see what's actually happened on the ground, and then went back home and saw what the CBC or the CTV had to say about it. Yeah. Saw this disconnect. And then I think the legacy media lost total respect and total credibility among citizens. And then so exactly it's happening what happened back then. Nobody believes the mainstream media anymore, other of course than the people that do want to believe it. For one, I was looking, so I do follow the polls now, trying to see what's happening. How I don't fully trust the polls, I'll tell you the truth, because I do think they're used for political gain as well. But you do want to see what other people are seeing. So I did go on CBC, and CBC has this poll tracker, and they project who's going to win, and they so they have the top 3 parties, and then they have the Green Party at projected 4.9%, I believe, and then they have the other party at right now it's 5.3%. So we're already better than the Green Party, but they would not mention our name. They wouldn't say it's New Blue or the Ontario Party.
Yeah.
They would just say other, just to keep the lid on our name. So the only way we could let people know about our existence is by getting out there, knocking on doors, handing out flyers, and putting out signs. That's the only, and social media, I guess. And what we're doing right here as well. But I do want to go back to, if you don't mind, to the convoy and how the other parties have described what was going on in Ottawa. And so firstly, I'm still amazed why the left, and namely the NDP, that really whose origin it is to defend the working man, right? The labor. It was the labor movement. That's how the party really originated. What we've seen in Ottawa, I mean, truckers, those are the hardworking men and women of Canada. A lot of it wasn't just truckers. Who suffered the most during the pandemic. I mean, I have the privilege of being able to work from home. I didn't suffer much in terms of my ability to make a living. It was the working man, the person that works with his or her hands, and that really supports this entire economy. They suffered the most, especially if they decided not to get vaccinated. So those were the people protesting. That's how the protest started. And yet we have the NDP, who claims that they're representing the working class, going totally against the working class itself.
Yes.
So I just don't understand the dynamics of what's happening now. So now it turns out that our party, which is a conservative party, a true conservative party, because we don't think that Doug Ford PCs are conservative anymore, is really representing the working man, the working class. It flip-flopped like that. But you know what? Not surprising again, because this is exactly what happened in the Soviet Union. Who started the solidarity movement? That was the labor movement first. Then it became a political force. So again, analogies. It's as if history is making a circle here.
Yes.
And on one last point, if I can, about the media and how it's being portrayed. What's really absurd is the word occupation and to describe what's happened in Ottawa, because occupation, to my understanding, and I like history, is when a foreign army invades another country and occupies the country. That's to my understanding what occupation is. This was a protest of honest citizens. There was no violence there. It was loud until it wasn't. I understand, but it was a protest in the capital, which citizens have right to do. It is described all the time that was illegal. From the legal perspective, I guess it was legal because they never got the permit. But look, if the solidarity movement in Poland had to ask for a permit from the communist government, I mean,
they'd still be in the movement. Yeah.
Exactly. So of course it was legal. It had to be. A true protest is legal. Must be.
I think along those lines, to substantiate that, there was a court case at the time of the protest where an Ottawa judge ruled, and it was because of excessive honking. He in his ruling, he said, okay, the honking has to stop, and it did. But he described the protest as a legal protest that was deserving of charter protections. So in that decision, in that one court decision in Ottawa at the time, it was declared to be a legal protest. Now, I find your NDP analysis very, very interesting, because I think if we flip the script, if we put today's NDP into pre-1989 Poland, I don't think the NDP would be representing Solidarity. They'd be representing the government. It's a total flip of their of where they come from, of what they're supposed to be. And I'm going to make a prediction here. I'm going to make a prediction and say that the NDP, if they don't smarten up real quick, they're going to be toast. I think they're going to go the way of the buffalo, because they are not being true to their roots at all. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I mean, look, they
Go
are.
ahead.
I mean, by going into an alliance with the Liberal Party, the ruling government,
Yeah.
essentially they gave up their independence. And if I were an NDP supporter, I would be really upset with the fact that
Yes.
essentially now we have just a two-party system, the Liberal, and then you have the opposition, the Conservatives.
Actually, it's really quite frightening, because I would argue with that. I would say we don't have a two-party system. We have a uniparty system made up of Liberals and NDPs to form a one-party state. We've only got one party. They got the majority, and in Canada, a majority is like having a dictatorship, really, the way our system is set up. And we're in a uniparty state right now.
Right now, the hope is though that the Conservatives will choose a good leader finally.
Yes.
And that brings me to another point, if I can. So one of the questions I get asked all the time is, hey, look, if we vote for you, and when I go out and when I knock on doors and I get to tell the message, people love it. I mean, we're really representing the Conservative values, number one, in terms of fiscal policies, but we're also talking about freedoms, individual freedoms, freedom from any type of government coercion, and so on and so forth. The kind of stuff that we talk about here. But then the question is, but if I vote for you, I'm making it more likely for the Liberals or the NDP to win the election. And if we're splitting the vote on the right, then it's gonna get worse. And so my response is this: look at what happened in 2021 last year, when the PPC party did take away a number of votes from the Conservatives, and it actually got a lot of votes. And there's a debate, whether or not those are actually Conservative votes, but let's assume they were. And the Conservatives lost, and it got worse. It got worse because the Liberals won again. But what happened then? Then we had the convoy. Then within a couple of days, O'Toole, who was really a Liberal, got kicked out. And now the Conservatives have a chance of a good leader. And then maybe that party will get rebuilt. There's a huge support for example, Pierre Poilievre, and he's talking about freedoms, and whether he's doing it for political reasons, probably. But the point is, the Conservative Party is getting back on track. At least that's the chance here. So it has to be painful initially. So even if we cannot let Doug Ford win, because if we do, we're just saying, hey, look, do what you do, because you're the bad choice, but you're better than the other choices. What we have to do is really make them lose and say, no, we like these guys. And what's going to happen then is that the Conservative Party itself, the PCs, I mean, will have to shift towards the right, and they will have to start considering the freedoms and the issues that we're talking about, because at the end of the day, they're after the votes. There's no, in my opinion and in my judgment, there are no moral values anymore within party politics in the establishment parties. So if we have to show that the vote is on this side, you guys got to switch over here. Otherwise, we're not voting for you.
Yeah,
so, and again, it's an analogy back to Poland. I mean, it's amazing how, again, the history repeats itself, but before it got better, it got worse. The solidarity started winning, in a sense. There were protests, people were on board, and then the crackdowns happened.
Yeah.
And it got worse for a little bit, but then it got better, and Poland now is a free country. And as a matter of fact, I traveled to Poland in October, and I was gonna stay there, because I could feel the freedom. I could feel people there wasn't so much oppression, and especially the people were free themselves. The government had to kind of act because we're part of the European Union. So we do have to act sometimes according to what the European Union says, but it never imposed any strict measures on the society, and the society never followed, was never coerced into, for example, there were no vaccine mandates in Poland.
Okay, good to hear.
Yeah.
And that, I guess the other thing with, you know, voting in accordance with your principles, say your conservative principles for conservatives out there, is that if you do get even a couple of seats, say a new blue party gets a couple of seats, well, there's a couple of seats, at least there's someone in the legislature that will speak on your behalf, that will bring forward your points. If you strictly always go for the what you think is going to be the winning horse, well, those points never get raised because you never get anybody into the legislature itself to express those points. So it's, and who knows,
Yep.
at the end of the day, you might have one of those cliffhanger elections where the margin of the win is 1 or 2 seats, and there you have 3 new blue Ontario party guys or girls filling those seats. Boy, that could make a world of difference. So there's a couple of ways of looking at that.
And interestingly, it's with a new party like the New Blue, we have, as usually when one votes for a candidate locally, they say it's about 5% that the local 5% of the vote that the candidate himself or herself locally can change. Otherwise, people vote for the leader. So if we have a local candidate here in Lanark for the PCs, really the people that are voting for that candidate are voting for Doug Ford. And, so it goes with other establishment parties. With a small party or a new party like the New Blue, the leader himself has as much of a chance of winning as we do here locally. In other words, you're not voting for the leader, you're voting for your local candidate, because that candidate has as much, again, of a chance winning as the leader, and there's a chance that the leader doesn't win and the candidate wins, and therefore the candidate will represent the positions of his or her constituents directly.
What a concept! What a concept!
And exactly. And another interesting thing is, and I told you I'm not a politician in a sense. I've never wanted to be one, never trained to be one, never really aspired to be one. And I'm here just because the government wouldn't let me be. I mean, if the government changes the direction, I'll be happy to leave politics, and I'll be happy to stay away. But until then, I have to fight. I have a 15-month-old son, and I really want to make sure that he grows up in a free country. So until then, I have to fight. But and I forgot my thought here.
That's why I'm here on the other side of the camera, Marcin, because I got a lot of things I'd prefer to be doing. I got grandkids and all the rest of the stuff, but I'm here because I got to be here, and I got to be here for my grandkids. Otherwise, you know, the country's lost to them. So.
And you're doing an amazing job. And look, I was browsing through your website, and actually, and here's another analogy. The one-stop shop, Tyrant shop.
Yeah. One-stop Tyrant shop. Yeah.
I was going through that list. Amazing. And you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of the Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn, and not because it's, you know, that was a novel, and that was of course a long book to read, but the way the book was structured, it listed slowly what was happening at the beginning of the Soviet Union, and how the tyranny came in slowly, and how everybody started behaving weirdly from our perspective right now. It's only when you put it on one page and go an event after an event after an event, and then you see the absurdity of it all. And then as the book continues, of course, we all know what happened in the Soviet Union. So it started in absurdity, started with silly behaviors, silly government actions, legislations, and then it ended up in tragedy and millions of people that died.
Yeah.
So that reminded me, because I was going through that list, and yeah, so many things happened over the past 2 years, and you've condensed that very well on those few pages. So it was very interesting to me.
Yeah, I think when I look at that list, as I was making the list, I was thinking, you know what? This looks like this is planned. I mean, you know, a measure after a measure, a thing after a thing, an edict after an edict, and then you see the free speech, anti-free speech initiatives coming forward in the form of legislation thrown in the midst, basically up front, basically to get the whole thing rolling. I don't know. It just struck me as a plan, but I know I do want to cut away to a screen, because this time I want to give you a chance to talk to, this is the New Blue Party blueprint, your platform. And I think we've talked about most of this stuff. And right up front, you've got, okay, the New Blue is going to fight to end all mandates, repeal of Doug Ford's emergency measures. And I think I really like this last part here, restitution for those harmed by emergency measures. And basically, you know, having people called to account, political accountability for what happened over the past 2+ years. Your platform goes on to renew accountability, defund establishment media, grow Ontario's economy, provide. This is basic conservative principles here that you're speaking to. And there's your Jim Cariolis and Belinda Cariolis as leaders of the party. But this caught my attention up front here, this freedom part. But maybe that's a good place to end this little talk here, Marcin. Is there anything else you'd like to point out, maybe from that platform, from the New Blue Party, or anything you'd like to stress?
You know, I'd rather like to talk about something else, because you know, frankly, anybody can go on the website, and I'm not here also to be promoting the party the way the establishment parties are talking about this themselves all the time. We're here to fight for freedom, and we do hold conservative values. We're and we hold them dear. We're also a number of individuals, not very, other than Jim, who has experience in politics for years, and Belinda, who got elected, I believe, I hope I'm not mistaken here, but for the first time 4 years ago. Yep. Really, we don't have that many politicians running for the seats here. These are regular people like myself that just don't know what to do anymore, and decided to pick up and stand up against the tyranny. But I wanted to talk about one thing, because I'm noticing, and this is really scary in a sense, because there's lots of fear out there among Canadians. I received emails such as, "Thank you for fighting to bring our lives back. We can't go out there and talk." I had a conversation with a journalist saying that he wanted to interview a few ladies who were participating in the convoy, but they didn't want to, because they were happy to talk about it, but they didn't want to be mentioned in the newspaper, because yes, they were afraid of repercussions. Yes. I had a lady donating money to me over the phone. I asked if I can put out a lawn sign on her property, and she says no, because she's afraid. She's afraid her you know, her family's member's account got frozen already once, and she's afraid. There's lots of fear out there. Yep. So I guess with that being said, all I have to say is let's not be afraid. I mean, it's the Pope. Those are the exact words of the, going back, you know, full circle on the conversation of John Paul II when he came to Poland. He stood up there among millions of people and said, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid, because once you're if you're afraid, then the government takes over, and then the tyranny grows. If you're not afraid, you gotta come out and gotta fight this, because that's the only way. And at the end of the day, we will win. Tyranny is against human nature. It has no place in the long term. It has to fail. There's no, but we need people to stand up and be courageous like you are, Russ, and doing this. So I really appreciate the conversation. I thank you for what you're doing, and yeah, let's get out there and vote, and let's help out your local candidates. We need volunteers. The media doesn't talk about us. We don't have funding, so the establishment parties get the taxpayer money to fund themselves. We don't have that. We rely on donations, and we rely on local volunteers. And the only way others will learn about us is by people coming out and putting out signs and handing out flyers. So spread the message, and yeah, thank you, Russ, for
okay. I think I like your last analogy there with the Pope. I think the first 3 words he spoke to the crowd in Warsaw was "Be not afraid," and
yes,
and he took that from a good reference and a good source, and I think people took that to heart, and once they saw, as you say, they looked around the crowd and saw that they were not alone, then it all kind of fell into place. And
yeah.
I think we're at that hinge moment now, and I certainly hope so, but I really believe that we're at that hinge moment right now.
Yeah. Well, look, it's interesting that it came from the church. I mean, the Pope leads the church, and the communists were always afraid of going into the church, of destroying the church, because well, the church itself is a very strong institution in Poland, but also the communists knew that it's a place where once you get in, it's gonna be the population will get really upset. However, what it's been doing, it's been trying to fight the church indirectly, and I think it's kind of I mean, we've seen burning churches here in Canada, and
yes,
you know,
yes,
it's being portrayed as a revenge against the First Nations issues and so on and so forth.
yeah.
But really, it's again, it's the tyranny always goes after the religious institutions, and the reason is because if one believes in God, then they won't believe in the government. I mean, the God is the highest power. If one really believes in God as the highest power, they will not be afraid of the government. But if you remove that, the higher power, if you remove God, then the only thing that's left is the government, and then people become afraid. So so that is another analogy.
Another analogy, yes, indeed. And I think it's one that really speaks to. And maybe we should terminate it here, because now we're really getting into are we really dealing with a spiritual battle here? Are we really dealing with good versus evil? Are we in that kind of point in history at this particular point in time? But I think we should leave it there, because that could go on for a long, long time. So I'd like to thank you once again, Marcin, for a great chat. It's a real pleasure to have you and introduce you to our membership at Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms. I guess I've shown the website there. I think they could probably get support to you through that website, so I'll leave it at that. For people interested in our website, it's canadiancitizens.org. Take a look at it, join the conversation. And with that, Marcin, thanks very much. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.